10 steps on how to overthrow a dictator. This is the topic of my video today, and you're welcome to watch it. Today we're gonna talk about what is happening in Russia. And no, we can't call it an election. It's not even close to be an election. And I will explain you why and show what is actually happening in the country. This is one thing, and also we will see what is happening in Ukraine and what Russians can do about the situation and how we can help them. In the very end, I'll show you one neat chemical experiment. Don't attempt it at home. You can attempt it in some other places, in my opinion, but it's up to you to decide. Use the information I provide at your own risk. Since I'm in Canada, I'm not gonna come on the streets of Moscow with Russians. And this is how I can help them. This is a plan, how to go about it, what need to be done. And many Russians are highly educated and intelligent people. Many of them are good people. I believe they can use the plan and make something out of it. But it's up to them to decide what they're gonna do. And I only can suggest and provide some help within the frame of what information necessary and so on. Also in Russian I have a special video about how to protect yourself during riots and how to protest and how to dress up and what to bring and what not to bring and so on. But this is for Russians only, and everybody else from democratic countries, they already know how to go about this. So, let's go. Hello dear friends, welcome back to my channel Enough of Propaganda. I'm Elena, I'm creator of the channel and the only person who is filming and doing absolutely everything about my channel to be able to share with you valuable information which I am as Russian and Canadian citizen can provide. The person who was born and lived in the USSR and in Russia, and who has already seen most of what's happening right now. I have seen it before. I have seen it in the USSR, I have seen it in Russia. It's for some of you, maybe it's something new, for me it's not. I have been there already. That is why I'm warning you about what's gonna happen to you if you're gonna follow USSR and Russia. None of these paths are good. The democracy is the best way for the countries to be successful, happy, prosperous, and good. The dictatorship is not. This is why I'm making my videos and explaining things to people and telling them and giving them information they can find for themselves and verify and find out the truth. So that's what we're gonna talk about today. We're gonna talk about Russia. This is a beautiful post stamp made by Valery Bachkov. It says Post of Russia, Russian Post 2024. Election, they call it. I'm calling it a theater of one actor, Putin. It's just a play. Somebody asking, well, so are we voting for Putin? And the mother said, yes, dear, for the war, for the death, and for torture. This is what Russians are voting today, especially the ones who actually voting for Putin. There are such people, believe me. And they are voting for the war, for the destruction of Russia and Russian economy, for the destruction of other countries, for the future wars, for Russian poverty, increase of Russian poverty, for the death sentences for their sons, fathers, brothers, husbands, and sometimes wives and women, because some of them go into the war as well as medical people and so on. This is what Russians are voting today. Whoever actually voting for Putin, which is, it's not a majority, it's a play. There are no election. Keep that in mind. In the dictatorship country like Russia, there are no elections. There cannot possibly be any elections. There are no constitution, laws, nothing like that. It's not an election in any way. Putin killed the opposition like Navalny, Nemtsov, or anybody. He did not allow any even pro-peace against war candidate Nadezhdin wasn't even allowed to run, or Duntsova. Nobody who actual opponent for Putin was allowed to run. So this is not an election. This is a play. a staged play. And actual Russians who actually voting for Putin are voting for new wars. They're voting for country living without laws and without constitution, and for going back to the Stone Age. Hurrah, let's go back to the Stone Age. This is what it means to actually vote for Putin. And Russia is attacking Ukraine again. This is what Putin represents. Destruction of Russia, destruction of Ukraine, destruction of other countries. At least 16 people were killed, at least 55 was injured in Russian missile strike on Odessa this morning. And even killed paramedic and rescue worker who had arrived at the scene after the first explosion to provide assistance. And also heavily injured medics and rescuers as well. That's what said Oleg Kiper, the head of Odessa Regional Military Administration. Russia is the terrorist state. Elections are fake. They're not elections. It's just a disgrace to the word election. This is what Putin's critic and enemy of Putin, who Putin tried to kill, and basically ask American President Trump in Helsinki to give up to Putin. British citizen, like American president can do that. Bill Browder, the guy who was fighting Russian corruption, who was behind the law of Magnitsky and so on. This is what he has to say.
To even call it an election is an insult to the word election. Putin has killed, imprisoned, or exiled every person who is in any way in competition to him. He has gone around and terrorized the people of his country. You can't say a word about him without losing your job, losing your freedom. And so what we have right now is a full-on totalitarian regime. This sort of spectacle that they're putting on over the next 3 days is a complete fake. There's nothing legitimate about it from start to finish. And he's going to try to use it to then say, look, we have a democracy in our country, and there's a competition to be president, when in fact there's no such thing.
I totally agree with what Mr. Browder said, because I have lived in USSR. I have seen that fake elections many times. That's why when foreigners was coming to the USSR and they trying to tell us that you guys don't have, oh no, we have elections. Yeah, we have just one party and one candidate, but we just voted for them, it is an election. No, it's not. And yet, many Russians and Soviet people believe that we are a democratic country, we have free elections. We just did not know any better. Now we do. There is no elections in Russia. Browder is right. And this is the guy who staged everything. Putin. Look at the old guy who doesn't even know how to use a computer. All he has to do just one click of the mouse. Because he can't do anything else. Everything's so prepared for him. He doesn't even know how to use a computer in this day and age. My father, which is way older than Putin, learned how to use computer. And Putin is just that stupid. He can't even use a computer. The screen said, thank you, you successfully voted. So there are no laws in Russia. There is no constitution and there is no elections. It's a dictatorship totalitarian regime who is murdering Russian people and murdering people in other countries, and fighting horrible wars, and, for instance, the war in Ukraine, which is going on for over 10 years. Yes, full-scale invasion started in 2022, but the actual war started in 2014. Putin murdering people, and whatever happened in Odessa is just one of the examples. He's doing it on a daily basis. That is why Russia is a terrorist state. Russians doesn't have any other choice. They can't really legally elect someone else. They can't legally protest or anything without being thrown in jail immediately. That is why I made my 10 steps, how to overthrow a dictator. And this is what we're gonna talk about today. Attempting to overthrow a dictator in a country where the media is controlled and dissent is harshly punished requires careful planning and considerations of the risk involved. And here is a detailed plan that outlines possible steps. Number one, gathering support and building a network. We need to establish a network of like-minded individuals who share a common goal of overthrowing the dictator. This network should be diverse, encompassing various sectors of society, such as intellectuals, activists, disgruntled members of the regime, and sympathetic military or security personnel. To ensure security and minimize the risk of detection, consider implementing a strategy similar to the preparation for the Russian Revolution 1917, when the small cells of mini organizations consisting of a few trusted individuals operate independently. This way, if one cell is compromised, it minimally impacts the rest of the network. As I'm saying, during the revolution of 1917, basically the country and Bolsheviks, they divided themselves into like groups of three and created chains of mini organizations with 3 people in each one. And in case it was done for the safety, in case one link is broken, they only know 2 other people, that's all. They can't betray everybody else. Because of that sham elections, that so-called elections, this is the comedy, or I would say tragedy, most likely, in Russia, Russians doesn't have any other choice. Like doing it in a violent way overthrowing a dictator. They don't have an option to do it peacefully. Navalny was wrong about this. Navalny was trying to do everything by the law, within the frames of the law. This is over. It's gone. After Putin so-called re-elected, this is all gone. His hands would be untied. For now, he's trying to pretend, trying to make sure that people thinking that he really popular or this and that. And there will be Putin's puppets abroad who would say, oh, he got elected and he get that many votes. 100% of Russians and 120% of Russians voted for Putin. This is a lie. The truth is, there is no real elections. Putin is usurper. He was usurper and still is. Previous elections wasn't real either. Putin is not a real elected, illegal and legal leader of Russia. That is why I'm warning Russians that this is what they have to do to remove him. This is very dangerous, but the option 2 is to stay within Russia like it was in the USSR, and it would be way worse. It's up to them to choose which one they want, but this is how it's gonna be. The step 2 is creating awareness. This is what I'm doing right now, because this is what's happening on Russian voting polls. When the guy said he gonna vote for anybody other than Putin. So this is for people who new on my channel and may be thinking there are laws in Russia or anything like that. There isn't. This is how it is. This is actual, real representation of Russia right now. So what's that involved with the step 2? Utilize alternative communication channels to spread information about the regime's oppression and human rights abuses. Here's one of them for you. This could involve underground newspapers and radio broadcasts or encrypted online platforms and so on. Employ symbolism and slogans to galvanize support and foster a sense of unity among dissidents. Use of the symbols such as flags, graffiti, or other messaging, hidden messages, which can help to build solidarity among those oppressed to the regime. And this is part where I'm taking part of. This is why I'm doing it in many ways. Because Putin is a threat to Russia, threat to the world, threat to whole humanity. That is why he must be stopped. This is why, partly to defend Ukraine, this is why I am doing what I am doing. Step 3. International support. Reach out to sympathetic foreign governments, international organizations, and NGOs for diplomatic and logistical support. This could involve lobbying for sanctions against the regime, securing funding for resistance efforts, or seeking asylum for key dissidents. leverage international media and social networks to amplify the pillage of those living under the dictatorship, gathering global attention and support for resistance movements. This is why I demand help from my government in Canada, and this is why Canada is helping Russia. Because we Canadians, we stand with Ukraine and we demand help. And Canadian government doing what we told to Canadian government to do. I personally wrote letters to Canadian Prime Minister. I talked to members of parliament, local and parliament of the country. And this is why my country, Canada, is helping Ukraine. And indirectly helping Russian people to fight this oppressive Putin's dictatorship fascist regime. Step 4. Building a parallel government. Establish a shadow government or alternative leadership structure that embodies democratic principles and provides essential services to communities marginalized by the regime. This could include setting up underground schools, healthcare clinics, community centers to demonstrate the viability of an alternative system. Encourage defections from the regime's administration by offering incentives and assurances of safety to those who choose to join the resistance. And this is just one of the examples. The wife of Alexei Navalny, Yulia Navalnaya, decided that she's gonna continue his fight. And she's his widow, and she decided she will gonna continue Navalny's fight. And some other countries like Belarus also has a government, basically abroad, and so on. I'm telling everything on the example of Russia, because I am a Russian citizen as well as Canadian, and I'm fighting for the freedom of Russian people in Russia. And I'm fighting for the freedom to Ukraine from occupiers on Ukrainian territory, and to stop the war in Ukraine by achieving the victory of Ukraine and clearing up all the territories of Ukraine from Russian invaders. And this is just one of the examples how to do it. Step 5. Organizing protests and civil disobedience. This is my video, by the way. This was people, I showed people who came to say goodbye to Alexei Navalny, Russian oppositional leader murdered by Putin. What is in this step? Coordinate peaceful protests, strikes, and acts of civil disobedience to demonstrate popular opposition to the regime. Plan these actions strategically to maximize impact while minimizing the risk of violent repression. Utilize social media and other communication channels to mobilize and organize protests, while also taking precautions to avoid detection by the regime surveillance apparatus. Basically, Navalny group and Yulia Navalnaya proposing action in the midday on Sunday. They will stand up against Putin using that sham elections, or this is farce Putin is calling elections in Russia. So everybody come at the same time at midday, at noon, to the polls. Show up all together to show people that they are not alone. I personally don't agree with even taking part in this comedy. There is no point in it. We need to use the time. The time is slipping away. Instead of do real fights and actually removing Putin from power. But this action could help people to know that they are not alone. The Navalny's death brought up a lot of people. Dozens of thousands of people on the streets, and they find out not everybody supports Putin. Putin lies all the time. People need to know that they are not alone, and this is how they can do that. Step 6. Sabotage and Disruption. Conduct targeted acts of sabotage against key infrastructure or government facilities to disrupt the regime's ability to maintain control. These actions should be carried out with precision to minimize collateral damage and avoid endangering civilians. Develop capabilities for cyber warfare and information operations to undermine the regime's propaganda efforts and disrupt its ability to surveil and control the population. This post, by the way, from Voronezh. And on some places, the pieces of paper voting for Putin already appeared in the bins before the place was even opened. Luckily, they had watchers there, and they complained, and it was removed from this particular bin. But in many other places, it's not. What Russia is doing, whatever they did even in the past, they're using special pens, which is kind of had disappearing ink if you heat it up. And I've seen the videos online already. Like, it was done in the previous election the same way. That's why it's not an election. So when you put a mark to some candidate, somebody just heat it up, mark disappear, and you can put it anywhere else, wherever you want. You want for Putin, you write Putin. The actual mark which person put who voted just disappeared. And this is how some Russians trying to sabotage that comedy Putin calls election. They try to put ink into the bins and stuff like that, which is useless. It doesn't matter what people do. It doesn't matter that right now Russian citizens from foreign legion of Russia and so on came from Ukrainian territory and fighting for over 3 days now in Belgorod region and in Kursk region. This is just a slap in the face for Putin, nothing more, because this is not an election. It's not going to influence people in any way, because people's opinion does not matter. It's not a real election. But some people might have felt good about it by doing this, and I kinda can understand why. This footage is from Ukraine. This is what Russia did to Ukraine. And you will see in Mariupol and Izium and some other places. And I, meanwhile, will talk about point 7, military and security forces. Seek to win over elements of the military and security forces who may be sympathetic to the cause of democracy. Offer assurances of amnesty or protection to those who will defect from the regime, while also preparing for the possibility of armed resistance from loyalist forces. Train and equip resistant fighters to defend themselves and their communities against regime reprisals, while also emphasizing the importance of minimizing civilian casualties and respecting human rights. This is Balakleya, Ukraine. And this is Izium, Ukraine. This is Kupiansk, Ukraine. Which Russia keep attacking every day for the last 2 years. This is Mariupol, which Russia destroyed, leveled, and I showed you in my previous video. And Ukraine said, we are coming. Ukraine will liberate all its territories. And our duty is to help them, because they are fighting for us as well. This is Odessa, when Russians hit the hospital. And different information about dead people said 19 dead already, 73 injured, and so on. And the step 8, called foreign intervention. Explore the possibility of foreign intervention, either through diplomatic means or covert support for resistance efforts. Engage with foreign governments and international organizations to secure funding, training, and other forms of assistance for the resistance. Be mindful of the potential consequences of foreign intervention, including the risk of escalating violence and further destabilizing the region. Strive to maintain autonomy and sovereignty for the resistance movement while leveraging external support to achieve strategic objectives. Part of what is happening right now, it's the Russian Legion and a couple other legions like Siberia and so on entered Russian Federation and right now fighting inside Russia. So Putin brought the war into Russia. But these guys are Russian citizens, they're not Ukrainians, they have full rights to be in Russia, and that's what they're saying. They're voting by their guns against Putin because he did not leave them any other choice. So I can't call them foreign intervention. They are Russians, it's not foreign intervention. And I doubt in the case of Russia foreign intervention is possible, but Russians might take arms like these guys and trying to defend their country from Putin and his regime. Point 9. Preparing for repression. Anticipate that regime will respond with increased repression as the resistance gains momentum. Develop contingency plans for protecting activists, journalists, and other vulnerable individuals from arrest, torture, or execution. Establish safe houses, underground networks, and secure communication channels to facilitate the movement of people and information while minimizing the risk of detection by the regime's security forces. There are plenty of cameras on the Russian streets and in metro. Perhaps it's time to make sure they don't work properly. And the 10th step, staying resilient, and we can learn from Ukraine. These people, for 10 years fighting Russia and staying resilient, this is what's happening to them every day. Recognize that overthrowing a dictator is a very difficult struggle that requires patience, perseverance, and resilience. Prepare for setbacks and obstacles along the way, while remaining steadfast in your commitment to achieving freedom and justice for your country. Foster a culture of solidarity and mutual support within the resistance movement, emphasizing the importance of unity and cooperation in the face of adversity. Celebrate small victories and milestones to maintain morale and momentum throughout the struggle. We need to help Ukraine, and this would be one of the biggest steps for the liberation of Russia from Putin's regime. I agree with this post. How many more people must die for Ukraine to get weapons it needs? How many more children must die? How many more children will never see their parents again? 10 years of war between Ukraine and Russian terrorists and occupiers. More than 2 years after a full-scale invasion. How many more deaths will take to finally stop Russian terror? We need to help Ukraine. And for Russians, it's crucial to help Ukraine, because it will help to liberate Russia, not because Ukraine will invade. It's just because while Russian army is tied up in Ukraine, and so is National Guards, Russians has a unique chance to be able to stand up for themselves. When our army will come back, it will make things worse. This is what Putin brought to Russia. This is Belgorod getting hit. And it's because Russia is fighting a war with Ukraine for over 10 years. From Belgorod and Belgorod region, Ukraine was shelled every day during 2 years of full-scale invasion. And before that, like in 2014, 2015, over 300 times Ukraine was shot from Russian territory, and Belgorod region is one of them. When Ukraine is fighting back and trying to defend itself and destroy some Russian fuel depots, for example, or some other military targets, the civilians will get hurt. It will happen. But so far, Ukraine managed to do precise strikes, and it doesn't happen as much as it happening in Ukrainian cities. When Russia using cluster munition by shelling cities, populated areas, and the world didn't stand up for Ukraine. Didn't stand up for Kharkiv, which was shelled by cluster munitions from the very first day of full-scale invasion. We need to help Ukraine. I'll link this video down below, you can watch it if you like. Russians need to remember, other countries has nuclear weapons too. Putin keeps threatening and threatening the world with nukes. That has to stop. I personally have several videos on Putin's nuclear threats, and they keep going on and on and on. Every foreign politician should realize that Russia is an enemy of your state. United States should realize it number one. And majority of Americans are, but few politicians in key positions, bribed by Russia or threatened by Russia or just loving Russian dictator, they preventing help for Ukraine, they should do it. Because Russia is threatening you with nukes. And this is a Jake Bro, I like his YouTube channel and stuff like that. That's what he says. If Russia uses a nuclear weapon against a NATO country, then this is what will happen to Russia in response. About 45 million Russians will be vaporized in the first hour. Not much of a life remaining for the other 100 million. So maybe people of Russia should stop supporting Putin and de-escalate this conflict. Putin is the one who escalating in everything. It is Putin who is threatening the world, not everybody else. And this is what's gonna happen to Russia if they will attack NATO with nukes. This is the other side of the country. Russians should know that. And Putin need to be taught a lesson that you can't threaten the world over and over and over. And number one step would be take away 300 billion of Russian money and use it to help Ukraine. If Russia keeps threatening, every time Putin opening his mouth and threatening the Europe, or threatening the United States, or threatening the world with nukes, there should be consequences for that. Enough of that already. There is no point to believe Putin in anything. Putin needs to be stopped. And he can be stopped by Ukraine militarily and by Russian resistance. This is the only way. And I promised you the reaction, chemical reaction. This is potassium permanganate and glycerin. This is what's gonna happen. You folding it like so. And oops, voila. I think it could be useful in some ways, or at least very neat experiment. Don't try it at home. Meanwhile, in Canada, in free and democratic country, crocuses are started to bloom. And this is how Russians could live. This is a hope for Russia, for Ukraine, for any post-Soviet, former Soviet country, Soviet republic. Canada is a hope. Russians could live like Canadians. They have to choose the path and fight for it. This is the future Russia can have. Live longer, happier, and in a free and democratic country. Canadian people, men and women, depends men or women, live from 8 to 16 years longer than Russians. And now it was before the war. It was like in 2017 when I was writing my book. Now with the war, as soon as Putin will drag himself through that process, so-called election, nothing can stop him anymore. He can mass mobilize as many people and kill as many Russians as he wants. He already killed over 500,000 people on both sides. Killed and wounded and missing in action. This is terrible losses, horrible war in Ukraine, and only victory of Ukraine can stop it. Please realize that. Please help Ukraine, support Ukraine, and support Russian people in their fight for freedom against Putin and his regime. My 10 steps plan is just an example for Russians what to do. It's up to them to decide to implement it or not, and what to implement out of it. Do anything about it, don't do anything about it. This is not up to me. I'm just providing the information. Thank you for watching. Thanks for coming. I'm grateful for every one of you. And have a good day. See you later.